Welcome to Mac Stories Unwind, the show that's all about the picks. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. You know what? We made it to a Friday. This is a Friday worth celebrating since it was a busy OS release and iPad hardware release week at Mac Stories, which kept the two of us pretty busy all week. But here we are at Friday, starting to think about our weekend. And I think, fortunately, what this means, this getting through the review season means you and I will have, I hope, a little more time to catch up on movies and TV shows, some of our video game backlog and all that stuff, because I know I haven't watched a whole lot of television in particular over the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, I've been watching some TV. I can probably mention that real quick before we talk about our main topic. Yeah. After we wrapped up Better Call Saul, we jumped straight into Breaking Bad again. So we've been watching,
interesting.
Yeah, we've been we are already at season 3 out of 5, I want to say. But yeah, and the thing we discovered, I mean, first of all, still an excellent TV show. Like it holds up well.
That's good to know.
The main story, the characters, the pacing, unlike Better Call Saul, which arguably starts kind of slow, Breaking Bad immediately hooks you. Like it's like from the first 20 minutes, you are already in the story. So such fantastic storytelling. Bryan Cranston, I mean, what a performance. Aaron Paul, incredible performance as well. Dean Norris, I believe, is the name of the actor who plays Hank Schrader, who is Walt's brother-in-law, who works in the DEA. All incredible performances all around. And of course, later on, Giancarlo Esposito, who plays Gustavo Fring. I probably said that with an Italian accent. I believe in American you would say Esposito, I guess. But that's the proper Italian pronunciation. And what we discovered is that first, we really didn't remember a lot of things from Breaking Bad, which is not a surprise because we watched it only once 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's a long time.
There's entire sort of plot lines that we had completely removed. Second thing we noticed, a lot of the techniques that they used in Better Call Saul, they actually used for the first time in Breaking Bad. Some of the flash forward techniques. I thought they were new to Better Call Saul, but you can see how they experimented with them in Breaking Bad, and then they fleshed them out more in Better Call Saul. So the jump forwards in the timeline with the black and white images, like that was already used in Breaking Bad, and I had completely forgotten about it. And third and final point I will mention before your main topic, watching this after Better Call Saul and seeing Saul Goodman in the context of Breaking Bad is heartbreaking because all the things that happened before. To see Saul alone with his practice, dealing with criminals and other shady people and knowing the context of what happened before, it's just so sad and heartbreaking. But it also reinforces what Sylvia and I we were arguing about the finale of Better Call Saul, that I really wish that the final season of Better Call Saul had a better bridge, sort of that it served as a bridge from where the events wrap up in Better Call Saul to the beginning of Breaking Bad. Because I was hoping that there would be like a proper connection between the two, and yet still, having seen Better Call Saul, there's still like those few years of gap where things are left unexplained in terms of how does Jimmy go from this, new solo practice to becoming Saul Goodman. And there's still a few years of gap that they're never really explained. They're left to, for you to imagine. That's the only negative part of this. But yeah, otherwise, Breaking Bad, I love it. It's just so good. Like the main story, the performance, the great one-liners that Walt has. So yeah, if we're doing this, I guess we started a complete rewatch. Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad. We're gonna wrap things up with El Camino. If you have the time to spare, do it because it all holds up so well.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I mean, I wonder if they'll ever go back and revisit that gap that you mentioned and maybe do something like El Camino where they do a special movie or something that connects the two a little more tightly, perhaps. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right, Federico, I want to talk to you a little bit today about a brand new video game on the Mac called Resident Evil Village. Now, brand new video game isn't really quite right because this game came out in 2021, kind of mid-year, and it's available on basically every platform now, consoles, Windows PCs, Steam, just basically even the Nintendo Switch now, I think. And it hadn't been on the Mac before, and this is one of the games that Apple touted at WWDC as bringing it to the Mac using Metal 3 technologies. And Metal is a framework that Apple has been developing now for several years that I guess you'd say that it's really designed to improve video game performance on Apple platforms. It's hardware accelerated, GPU based graphics and other technologies that are used to enhance that experience. And with Metal 3, there are some new features, including some upscaling, where essentially what Metal can do is take lower resolution graphics and use machine learning and things on the fly to upscale them. This is similar to technologies we've seen from companies like NVIDIA that have this sort of thing. Steam Deck is a place where this is often very useful to have. And then there's also fast loading of assets because it's a system that's kind of like direct from the storage into the game in real time so that they, textures and other large graphic assets can be loaded as quickly as possible on the fly in a game for a better experience there as well. So those things have been released now that macOS Ventura is out. And Resident Evil is the very first big name game that takes advantage of those. And I got a chance to play it a little early, just a few days early, to see what it was all about. And from the standpoint of someone coming from Mac gaming, it's actually pretty impressive. I don't think you would say the same thing if you're coming from a high-end Windows PC, which I'd like to hear about from you. But I played this game on my Mac Studio, which has an M1 Max processor in it and 64 gigs of RAM and a studio display. And it looked quite good. I mean, it really looked quite good on that hardware. I was playing primarily at the recommended resolution, which is 2560 by 1440. And with one of the presets, which was called Prioritize Graphics, turned on. And at that, it was able to maintain 60 to 70 frames per second pretty much throughout the game. It dipped down a little bit in the 50s in a couple really intense scenes, but for the most part, it did a pretty good job. So that's kind of where I started because that's what is recommended by Capcom, the maker of the game. And there are a number of different presets. There are a couple of presets higher than the prioritized graphics that are available. One is ray tracing, which is not available at all on the Mac, at least not on my Mac.
Okay, ray tracing not available. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Not available. I don't know if that's available on the M1 Ultra or the M2, but it definitely is not available on this M1 Max box. Okay. So that's not available, but there also is a max setting as well, which is, in the settings, it'll tell you how much graphics memory you're going to use. And immediately when I set it to max, it was clear I was going to overload the graphics memory. So I had to turn a few other settings down in order to make that work. But that was doable too. So I experimented at that point with a couple of different things. First was I really wanted to see what Metal FX upscaling did to the performance. And so starting from that baseline of what was recommended, I turned that on. And that definitely stabilized the frame rates overall in the game and kept everything locked at pretty much a steady 60 frames per second. And it also allowed me, though, to go up and upscale the resolution quite a bit and keep the frame rates at about 60. There are a couple of different Metal FX upscaling settings. One is quality, which prioritizes the graphics, and the other is performance. And at the resolutions above 1440, the first couple, I was able to keep it on quality and still maintain 60 frames per second. But once I started getting up into the sphere of 3840 by 2160, I had to switch over to performance in order to kind of maintain that 60 frames per second. So basically, I guess my conclusion of the experiments was that on this particular M1 Max chip, you can keep things at about 60 frames per second. You can't really meaningfully go above that unless you're willing to drop down in resolution to something like 1080p or even lower. And then to wrap things up, I also tried this on an M1 MacBook Air, where the performance dropped down immediately to more like the 30 frames per second range and wasn't really able to handle much more than that. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, as the game goes, I'm not a big fan of horror survival games like this. This is a very scary game, and I was playing it too late at night as I was doing my research. It's a good game. I understand why people like it. But it's just not my cup of tea. I was really there more to see what Metal 3 can do for gaming on the Mac than I was to really review this particular game. And by and large, I think it does a pretty good job. I mean, for comparison's sake, I guess I opened up Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is a game that Apple has touted a lot in the past as being really good on Apple Silicon Macs. And it does not use Metal 3, and it looked good, but it was struggling a little bit with the frame rates. It was definitely dropping quite a bit below 60 frames per second at various, higher resolutions. So it seems as though Metal 3 is definitely pushing gaming forward on the Mac. Whether and how many developers actually get on board and update their games to take advantage of this really remains to be seen. I mean, I think at WWC, aside from Resident Evil Village, there were two other games that were mentioned that haven't come out yet. One is Grid Legends, which is a racing game, and the other is No Man's Sky. Now, both of those are supposed to come out before the end of the year, and we're getting pretty close to the end of the year at this point, but I don't know, when either of those is planning to come out.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I have a few thoughts based on what you wrote and the screenshots that you shared. So first of all, you have this debug tool shown.
Yes,
that has to be new, right? Because it's showing you the performance of a metal based game. So that's nice, and it's very much reminiscent of kind of sort of like the Steam overlay, for example. On Steam, you can have this kind of overlay where you see the GPU consumption and the frames, the refresh rates, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's actually a terminal command is what that is.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Okay, so obviously there's a terminal flag for it. So based on your numbers and these benchmarks, it seems to me that the M1 Max and this game in particular, you end up with a performance that's comparable to a medium to high end PC. I mean, we're talking 1440p, prioritized graphics, 60, 70 FPS.
Right.
By comparison, at an RTX 3080 graphics card by NVIDIA, so not even a 3080 Ti, a regular 3080, should get you at the same level, like 1440p, you should get like 120, 140 FPS.
Yep, that's true.
So that's definitely a difference there. You mentioned you don't have the ray tracing option. So that's another thing to consider here. You cannot enable ray tracing on the M1
Well,
Max.
you can't in this game. I do believe Metal 3 does does allow for ray tracing. It's just not available in this game because when you select it, it says not available on this hardware. And I don't. So that may be an issue with the game more than it is the actual hardware, because the framework does support ray tracing.
So it does support ray tracing. The problem is this game.
I think
right?
so.
So that's the takeaway, right? Because I mean, if you take a look at these numbers alone, yeah, you are pretty much in the medium range of GPU performance if you're comparing the M1 Max to an NVIDIA graphics card. The other thing that jumps out to me here is that in all these screenshots, you seem to have slightly uneven frame pacing. So that's the graphs that you see in your screenshots, the line with the blue and green optics. Yep. That should be frame pacing. So frame pacing would be the amount of time that it renders, the amount of time that it takes the GPU to render a frame, right? And usually you want to have a frame per second, right? That's what they're called, FPS. Usually you want to have that graph be even. So you have, for example, 40 FPS. Each frame is rendered, in a second, and you want to make sure that you match the refresh rate of your display. So, for example, if you have a 60 hertz display, 60 FPS, and it's all even frame pacing. The problem is that when you see those optics, when you see those irregularities in the graph, it means that occasionally some frames take longer, like a longer or shorter amount of time to render in the game, which may result in, and I mean, you gotta have the eye for this, but if you've been playing a lot of PC games, you're gonna notice this. But you will notice essentially some kind of flickering or stuttering on screen when you have really uneven frame pacing. Now, this is not really uneven because, like, for example, an image has only one small peak. The other images have, like it could be much worse, but it's something that stood out to me. This visualization here.
And I will say about those graphs that you're seeing, Federico, is that in order to get these screenshots, I had to take my hands off the controller and use the keyboard.
And stand still.
Yeah, exactly, in order to get these shots. And that's why, actually, those frames per second are actually higher than I mentioned in the story, because it's doing something when you're just standing still. That's where it says composited up in the corner there. It's doing something to actually, I don't know, increase the frame rates when you're not moving.
Well, I mean, if you stand still, usually, like if the game is computing fewer things at the same time. I get it.
It was weird though. It kind of changed the way it looked every time I did it. It kind of changed the. I don't know. There's something.
I mean,
changed.
I never played them. Yeah, I've never played a Metal 3 game here. I'm only used to my two gaming PCs, a portable one with the 3080 and the desktop one with the 3080 Ti. I mean, yeah, it seems to me like the quick takeaway seems to me that with the M1 Max, now, again, as you mentioned, we don't know how things are on the M1 Ultra, but on the M1 Max, it seems to me like you end up with this kind of medium level performance that I would say it's probably comparable to a console more than a gaming PC.
I think so.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, given the state of gaming on macOS, like, this is not a complaint. Like, this is a good start, I think. Obviously, this all comes down to developer adoption,
absolutely.
Right? And you got to ask yourself the question, is the market even there for developers to consider writing a game in and optimizing for a completely different architecture? Like, if you're a game developer, what's your incentive for, writing a game for NVIDIA, or, for whether you have you're targeting folks with an NVIDIA graphics card or with a Ryzen system. But then you got to say, well, I guess we also need to optimize for Metal. And so instead of using AMD's FSR or NVIDIA's DLSS upscaling technologies, now we got to use Metal effects. Like, it becomes a whole thing that you need to do as a developer. And my question would be, are the numbers even there market-wise to justify that kind of investment, right? Now, obviously, I guess Apple must have cut with these companies some kind of deal, right, to make sure that these games can come on macOS as more of like a showcase piece to show off that you can, in fact, run a high-end game such as Resident Evil Village on a Mac. Now, you're not getting out of this, you're not getting, latest generation NVIDIA graphics card performance on a Mac. That's for sure. I think it very much remains an open question. Like, okay, we have the potential of a new beginning here when it comes to PC level gaming on macOS.
Right.
But we need consistency. We need consistency in releases from third-party developers. We need consistency from Apple in terms of reaching out to the developer community and iterating on this metal technology year after year, if not month after month. I mean, you take a look at what NVIDIA is doing with DLSS, the latest version 3 of their upscaling tech came out with support for ray tracing and machine learning optimized upscaling. You take a look at what AMD is doing with FSR. FSR also getting a major 2.1, I believe, version on PC.
They're updated all the time.
They're updated all the time. And what are we looking at here instead? The next update comes out at WWDC. Like, this is not just how things work in PC gaming land.
Right,
so
right.
We'll see.
It'll be interesting because, I guess the way I look at it is that we'll probably see more games like this one where it's a big release. It's kind of a hit. It's on, and it wants to be on every possible platform. The kinds of games that eventually end up on Switch, but start their lives on like PlayStation or Xbox, I think eventually may find their way to the Mac as well. But I think one thing that you pointed out that I think is very important is that this is not just about developing the technology and iterating on it. It's about reaching out to the developer community and the game publishers, and Apple's investing on the technical side with its engineers to make metal better. It's probably going to have to, I think, invest money with game publishers and strike deals to really jumpstart this and bring more AAA games to the platform in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Federico. Well, that's a good place to stop for this Friday. If ever, check out Resident Evil. It happens to be $40 on the Mac App Store. So, if you're interested in playing it on your studio display, if you have one, I'll say the HDR really looks great on that display for this game. I mean, it's a dark and creepy game, and that 5K display really makes it look really nice. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram as @Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.